Hey guys, this is Finn from Finley Clyde Crochet, and I am going to be doing a video for you here that I really wish I had been able to see when I started out, that I think is kind of an overlooked subject when you are first learning to crochet, which is basically just what is a stitch, what is in a stitch, what are the loops of the stitch, how do I tell which stitch I'm working into. When you're reading patterns, you'll often be asked to skip a stitch, work into the first stitch, work two into one stitch, and so it's important to know what exactly this stitch is, so you know where to place your hook and where to work into, which is something that may be really self-explanatory for some people, but for me personally, it took a little bit of practice to kind of figure out what that even means. So I'm going to start by demonstrating with some single crochet because that's going to be a real simple way of doing it. So I am just going to create 10 single crochet for the purpose of this. So chain up 10. And then 1 for the turning chain. And when it comes to working into a foundation chain, I think it's important also to kind of cover the parts of what a foundation chain or what a chain is too. Each of these kind of teardrops here is a chain. And when they're the pattern that you're reading, or really anyone that you're following, tells you to work into the second, third, fourth chain from the hook, they are not including this loop that is already on your hook. That's not a chain, that's just a loop on your hook. These below here are the actual chains. So when you're skipping a chain, such as the turning chain for the single crochet here, you're going to work into the second chain from the hook for single crochet, which is not this one, because this one doesn't count. It's going to be 1, 2, this one. So this is the second chain from the hook. If you're doing half double, it'll be the third, 1, 2, 3, or sometimes with double crochet, it'll be fourth down here, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and create a single crochet by inserting the hook, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through. And I'm just going to work up the whole row here because I feel like it's going to be easier to demonstrate the concept if I've got a whole row of stitches for you. So when you are creating a stitch, that is just this process of inserting the hook where it needs to be, pulling up and pulling through the appropriate number of loops, and that creates one stitch. So when they say to make one stitch, that's simply the process of doing this. In this case for single crochet, it's inserting, pulling up a loop, pulling through 2. And that's creating a stitch. So if you go ahead and look at what we have so far here, this is a row of single crochet. So let me just go ahead and point out to you what the parts of the actual stitch are. So the way I refer to it or think of it is that each stitch has legs and a head. So if you're looking from above, you're going to see these teardrops here, these 2 loops that are next to each other, and they create that kind of V or teardrop shape. That's what your stitch is going to look like from the top. So if you're looking from the top and it tells you maybe to skip 1 stitch, then this would be 1 stitch and you'd go into the next one. So that's what those look like from the top. From the side here, you're going to see that each one has 2 little legs here. They go into the chain or stitch below it that you've worked it into, and they are just the base of the stitch there, so the legs and the head. When you are working into your crochet though, you're not going to be looking at them from the front like that. You're going to be looking at the back of the stitches since you've turned your work. So this is what they look like from the back. It's a little bit different. As you'll see, you can still see the legs of the stitches, but the heads are now going to be made up of these two horizontal bars right there. If you'll notice, when you're looking at these, the head is kind of a little bit staggered from where the leg is. But when you're feeling your work, it's not always quite as visible, but when you're feeling it, you're going to feel a natural kind of hole right in here and here and here. I think in this one here is a little looser. You can see that hole there. That's where you're usually going to work your stitches. So for any regular old single crochet or really any stitch, you're going to be working into that hole there. As I pointed out before, you don't want to work into the turning chain here. That's the turning chain. See, there's one turning chain for single crochet. You're going to work into the stitch here where you can see it's created your legs, 1, 2 legs, and your head, which is going to be a little bit over to the right, as I said before, a little bit staggered. So when you're counting your stitches, just remember that the head of the stitch is going to be just a little bit to the side of where those legs are. So if you were told right now perhaps to skip a stitch, then you would be skipping this first one and going into this one. But for now, we're just going to go into the first stitch, which is referring to this first one that comes right after the turning chain. And when you work a stitch, normally you're going to insert it into that hole I was talking about and go under both of those two loops that make up the teardrop or the V there. And you'll see that you have now 3 loops on your hook. That's how you would just normally make a single crochet or really any stitch. If they don't specify what loop to work in or anything and they say to work into a stitch, that's what they mean. They mean under both of those top loops. You will sometimes encounter something like back loop only or front loop only. And so for a quick rundown of that, it's something we can go into more in detail in later videos, but just for a real quick reference, front loop means obviously the loop in the front, the one that is closest to you. So if you're looking at the top, it is this one right here. So if you're told to work front loop only, you're going to insert under there and you're going to leave out that back loop, and you'll see you'll only have those 2 loops on the hook as opposed to the 3 that you had before. And then you'll work your stitch just the same as you would do otherwise, but as you'll see, then it is worked only into that front loop, and it's going to look a little different, as you can see, because the it's only into this loop here. It's going to look just a little bit different than these other stitches did. So again, under that front loop, and just work it like any other stitch, and you've got 2 front loop only single crochets there. And then back loop, of course, is just referring to the other loop, the one that is in the back, this second one right here. So if you're doing back loop only, same thing as front loop only, you only insert it into the back loop. You've got 2 loops on the hook, and then you just work the stitch like you normally would. Back loop only, there you go. And then if you'll notice, when you work into back loop only, it is going to look very different. You're going to have the front loop kind of jetting out towards you, and these are going to be clearly in the back, and this will be used to create different types of texture, or a lot of the time for making like cuffs, things that are stretchy, you'll want to work into back loop only, but that's just as you encounter it in your patterns. That was just a quick rundown of what that means and what those parts are. So real quick, let me just show you the parts of a half double crochet and parts of a double crochet. Same basic concept. I just want to give you a little bit of a visual guide in case you are trying to count how many stitches you already have, count how many stitches to skip, whatever it is. Knowing what your stitch is a really important part of being able to appropriately work the rest of it. So here for the half double, I'm going into the 1, 2, 3rd chain from the hook, yarning over, inserting, yarning over, pulling up, yarning over, pulling through. That right there is what a half double crochet looks like. So you've got here the legs, just like in a single, and the head here is now actually made up of these kind of 2 loops, as opposed to with the single you saw. It was kind of more like the symbol for pie, where it's got 2 legs and just a flat kind of tabletop on there. That's a single crochet. The half double has that extra loop right in there, so it's going to look more like that. So let me go ahead and finish to the end of the chain with half doubles. And if you have created double crochets before, you can kind of see why this is called a half double crochet, because it really mimics the first half of your double crochet before you yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops on the hook. You will have the same sort of pattern to the stitch here. I'll show you in just a moment. All right, so if you'll see here, this kind of almost like how the single crochet stitch is. You've got the 2 legs and then this horizontal bar here underneath the top or the head of the stitch. It's this kind of little square here. That is the stitch, and that is very similar in appearance to the bottom part of a double crochet. So half double crochet really is just half of a double crochet. You've got kind of that bottom section of what a double crochet is in there. So horizontal bar, the 2 legs, and then the head. And when you're working into it, same thing, working under both loops unless you're told otherwise. And so let me real quick show you in comparison the double crochet. So 3 to turn, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through 2, and as you can see there, that's creating that kind of first half double, and you can see how it's very much like this part right here, a half double, and here is your half of a double. So you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 again to complete your double crochet, and there you have this kind of part right here with the 2 legs and the first horizontal bar, and then you've got these 2 horizontal loops right above it that create the head. So the double crochet being the taller stitch is going to be made up of more parts. It's going to be made up of this bottom part and the top part here. So that's all one double crochet stitch. So if we're looking at it, say you need to be counting how many stitches you've already created in different rows. It can be a little difficult, especially if you're looking at a previous row, not just the most recent row. It can be a little bit hard to identify how many stitches there are if you aren't aware of the parts of the stitch. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that now. If you're counting stitches in the last row, it's pretty simple. You can just look at it from the top here, and we can count that there are here 1 stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's pretty simple to do because you're just counting these teardrops, the heads of the stitches that are pretty easy and visible. And also when you're counting double crochet, it's pretty simple. You can see there's 1 bar, 2, 3, 4, so on. They stand out pretty well, pretty easy to count. But when you're looking down here at these half double crochet, it might be a little bit hard to count exactly how many you've got. So you want to look, what I do is looking at the legs, and that really kind of shows how many stitches you've got. So here you can see there's 2 legs. That means there's 1 stitch here. There's another 2 legs, so you've got another stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you'll notice here, this is just 2 chains. Looks very similar to the stitch at times, but if you'll feel it and look at it, you can see that's just a chain, whereas this is an actual stitch. So that is just a kind of a basic rundown of what a stitch is, how to count them, how to look at them, dissect them, know where you're working into and why you're working into that spot. Very basic concept, but really one that you want to be very aware of if you're reading patterns so that you can properly follow the instructions that you're given. So if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to drop them by, bookmark this, rewatch it, refer to it whenever you need to go back to just the basics of what a stitch is. Maybe you're encountering in a pattern where you need to skip a certain amount or you need to work into a certain part of the stitch. Again, very important to know what the stitch actually is. So, hope this was helpful to some of you, and happy hooking, everyone.